All right, well, I let the last few people in. I think it's time for us to get started. Welcome, everybody, to the Fraser Valley Conservancy's Nature Stewardship School, Caring for Owls in the Fraser Valley. This is a really exciting topic, the first time that we're having this owl-themed Nature Stewardship School, so I'm so glad you could join us. Please remember to keep yourself muted, keep your videos off. This session is being recorded. All right, so today you are going to be joined by our amazing Sofi Hindmarch. She's our owl biologist here at the Fraser Valley Conservancy. But for your introduction and ending, you're stuck with me, Aleesha Switzer, here at the FVC. For those of you who don't know us, you may be wondering, who is the Fraser Valley Conservancy? We are your local charitable land trust since 1998. We protect and enhance natural areas in the Fraser Valley to benefit native species, ecosystems, and local communities with a focus on stewardship and land securement. You can find out more about us on our website, our Instagram, or Facebook. Quick introduction to our OWL workshop agenda. First, I'm going to hand it over to Sofi, who will give you an introduction to the owls of the Fraser Valley. She'll wrap up with some stewardship tips on how you can help our owls. Then we'll have our question and answer period. So you're going to be entering your questions into the chat, and we'll get to them during our question and answer period later. We'll have a quick wrap up at the end, and that'll be that. So don't forget, just keep yourself muted, keep your videos off. You can ask your questions in the chat box and we'll get to them during the Q&A period. All right. Without further ado, I'm going to be handing you over to Sofi. Take it away, Sofi.
Thank you. Thank you for the very nice introduction too. See here. Here we go. Great. So thank you so much for coming tonight. It's great to see that many people sign up. So tonight I am going to talk about the various owl species that we find here in the Fraser Valley. I'm going to talk about their biology, where they live, what they eat, and then I'm going to talk also a little bit about the challenges that these owls are facing in our region. And then I'm going to wrap up with a little bit of sort of, as Aleesha mentioned, some tips about how you can help our local owls. So here's an overview of the various owls that you can find or see in the Fraser Valley. Some of them stay here year round and some of them are more migratory. And as you can see here, 2 to 3 top ones are designated as, I guess, listed species, which means that their populations have been declining to an extent that we are concerned. And they've been designated, as you can see here, either as threatened for the barn owl and the screech-owl, or as the short-eared owl as special concern, which means that their populations are being monitored and actions to halt the population decline has been identified and is in some areas being implemented. Before I continue the presentation, I was hoping to have a little poll. I guess Aleesha is going to do that, where you guys, there we go. This is neat. So where you can basically click on and sort of choose or say which owls you've seen or heard in the Fraser Valley. I'm always interested. So I can see here quite a few of you've seen the, probably not surprisingly, our barred owl, great horned, and barn owl are our most common resident owls. But there's a good range in there. Wow, great. Okay, so the barred owl, it's the most commonly seen owl, maybe perhaps not surprisingly. It's not a very shy owl. The barn owl, great horned owl. Quite a few have also seen the pygmy owl, and that's really neat that 14 or say 15% have seen screech owls and saw-whet. Yeah, I'm curious about the other owls too. So that's great. Thanks for sharing that. So I'm gonna start talking about the barn owl, which is the owl that's closest to my heart. I've been monitoring barn owls now for 15 years in the Fraser Valley. And the barn owls are what we call an open grassland bird. They have the longest wingspan relative to their body size of all the owls. They very actively hunt on the wings. And this is also where they find their favorite prey, the field vole. As you can see here, one's been lucky enough to capture one at Boundary Bay. Now, barn owls are what we call vole specialists. This little critter here is an extremely important prey item for the owls, the barn owls and other owls too. And for the barn owls, it doesn't matter if they live in very rural areas or are living in more urban environments. They all seem to be able to find these voles. And as you can see, it's a very important component of their diet. And again, I can't stress how important this little critter is for our other owls and our mammalian predators too. And these critters are primarily found in grasslands, be it natural marshlands, grasslands, wetlands, pasture, even the edges, the field margins, you can find these little guys, and in cultivated fields too. Barn owls also like to eat other critters, and there are a bit of geographical differences. So, for example, barn owls that live in more sort of areas where there's more forests tend to eat more deer mice and jumping mice. And then the urbanites definitely take advantage of the abundance of rats that are found along or found within the urban environment. And then too, I guess, for the pleasure of us at garden, they do also occasionally take some coast moles too. So just really quickly, I just thought I'd sort of present what I've been doing. I've had the great pleasure working on barn owls now for the last 15 years. Been involved in many different projects, but sort of my main primary occupation every year with some tangents is to monitor the nest sites of these barn owls. And barn owls are a little different than the other owls we'll be talking about tonight because they do nest primarily in human-made structures here in the Fraser Valley, such as the pole box in the back. They also nest in boxes in barns and also in riding arenas. They like the taller buildings with multiple openings. So I've been monitoring these nest sites now every year and also been trying to provide nest sites for the owls, barn owls, in areas where their options for nesting have been declining. So as I mentioned, I monitor these nest sites every year, record how many eggs, how many owlets hatch, and how many finally fledge. And what I've been working on is understanding how their productivity, so how many owlets they have each year over time, is influenced by the various variables that they sort of the conditions they have to live in. Because as I mentioned in the beginning, barn owls is a listed species. It's threatened in the Fraser Valley. And what we have seen is that the biggest threat that this owl is facing is the loss of their grassland habitat. So you can see in the picture there in the bottom left, you have sort of typical agricultural habitat that this owl relies on, primarily grassland associated agriculture and open landscapes, that this habitat has been directly lost due to urbanization. So again, there's been direct displacement of these owls in the valley. Another challenge for this owl is the changes in our agricultural practices. We used to be more vegetable-based and grassland-based, hay production, livestock. This is now switched. We have more intensive cash crops in our region, such as greenhouses and blueberry fields, which provide less habitat. So again, the habitat that remains agricultural overall is from a barn owl's perspective, it is less valuable for them in terms of finding field voles, their main prey. There's also direct loss of nest sites. As I mentioned, the barn owl is a little unique because it nests in human-made structures, such as the old barns. They're often not that practical for farmers these days. So these sites, they've also experienced direct loss of habitat or nest sites. Another challenge for the barn owl is with urban development, we also get infrastructure development, such as roads and railways. They further fragment the habitat for the barn owl, but as I mentioned in the beginning, barn owls hunt actively on the wing, and they typically fly 1 to 2 meters above ground, actively listening and also looking for their prey. So unfortunately, when they have to cross these roads, the barn owl is one of the owls that are most likely to be hit by vehicles due to their hunting behavior on our major highways. So that's also been a big challenge for the barn owls, unfortunately. And there's another challenge too that is applicable for all the owls, which I'll talk about a little bit at the end, but I just thought I'd mention it now too, and that's the risk of secondary rat being exposed to rat poison secondarily. But I'll talk a little bit about that at the end of the presentation. So you can see the barn owl is facing quite a few threats in our increasingly urban environment. However, I did a radio telemetry study 8 years or so ago with a good friend of mine, Paul Levesque, and also an excellent field biologist, where we radio tagged some barn owls and we actively monitored barn owls living in rural agricultural areas, but we also wanted to see, as part of our research question, whether we would find owls in more urban environments too. And I wanted to introduce you to the cosmopolitan barn owl. I probably overused this picture, but I love it because it's true story. It hasn't been photoshopped. This is a barn owl from the UK that is part of a rehab facility, but during an outing with its rehab facility, doing outreach, this male barn owl saw a young teenage boy on a skateboard escape from its handler and essentially flew off and landed on this boy's skateboard and tried it out. And as a result, the handler custom built this skateboard for this barn owl. Pretty neat story. I have not seen this myself when I've been out monitoring barn owls at night, but what was really neat about the telemetry study we did was that we actually found barn owls living in quite urban environments in the Fraser Valley. For example, here, these owlets, the adults are actually nesting underneath the Alex Fraser Bridge, a very busy bridge between Delta and Richmond, the Highway 91, one of the big transport routes into Vancouver and US, goes over the Alex Fraser, and these guys, the barn owls, were able to make a living hunting the remaining grassland habitats along the highways and patches of grass between the industrial development on Annacis Island. Again, here too, just fascinating to see these owls. There you can see the bottom right, one of the adults is delivering a vole for the clutch of barn owls. Another example of how these barn owls, at least, are trying to adapt to our environments as they become increasingly urban. This is from California. Around the same time, this clutch of barn owls, or the barn adults, decided to nest in the balcony of the Marriott Hotel in California. and they did so successfully 2 years in a row. So of course, the hotel took advantage of this, and I think they became a designated wildlife site. And they also, of course, gave the adult barn owls, a merit rewards card, and the hotel room, of course, it had to be called the Hoot Suite after that. So again, just some great examples of how the barn owls, at least, although they are facing multiple human threats, are trying to adapt to the landscape as it becomes increasingly urban. And that is certainly good news for us. Another owl I wanted to quickly mention too, which has similar habitat preferences to the barn owl, is the short-eared owl. Again, you can see it has these beautiful long wings. It actively hunts on the wing. It used to be quite common here, and it used to nest year-round. Again, very dependent on old field, grassland, marshland. It's actually a ground nesting owl, so it nests on the ground. But there hasn't, to my knowledge, been any active nest sites of short-eared owls in this area for the last 40 to 50 years, but they used to be quite common nesting, and now they overwinter. They come pretty much right about now, or in mid-late November, they overwinter here, and then they typically leave around February, March, and breed elsewhere. Another owl that we see here in the valley is the long-eared owl. It's closely related to the short-eared. As you can see, it has similar features. The long-eared owl, again, is also associated with grasslands, open meadows, but it also depends on more brush and understory. These guys actually nest in old magpie or raven or crow's nests, and they also are seen communally together, as you can see here in this picture from Boundary Bay. Again, a species that was more common in the valley, but they do occasionally still nest here in the region. So moving on now to our forest owls, our resident forest owls. I thought I'd start with the one that most people had seen, and that's the barred owl. Interesting fact about the barred owl, some of you might be aware of this, but it's a recently new addition to our fauna here in British Columbia. They started to appear in the 1970s from back east. They came here on their own accord. Interestingly enough, too, now has become one of the most common resident owls that we see, both in very forested areas and also in quite urban areas, which I'll show you in a second. But I just thought I'd play you a recording of a barred owl that we got from Skagit this past summer. So you might have heard this, in addition to the sort of typical "who cooks for you" call. Again, these guys have an incredible vocal repertoire. They also have a call, it's called the monkey call. So I'm not even going to try that, but it's a special treat if you get to hear it. It almost sounds like you're in the tropics. Again, as I mentioned, the barred owl can live in very forested areas, but it's also been able to adapt to very urban environments. And this is sort of one extreme, right downtown Vancouver. This barred owl has made its home. And the reason it's been so successful is because it's, unlike the barn owl, which focuses on voles, barred owls are extremely opportunistic when it comes to what it will feast on. It will pretty much eat anything that's up for grabs. The very urban barred owls take advantage of the fact that there's lots of rats and pigeons around. They eat voles. I've seen them hunt crayfish along the edges of the creeks. They'll eat worms, whatever's available for them, essentially. So they've been quite successful here on the coast, and are pretty much found everywhere. Now, the next owl is our biggest forest owl, and that's the great horned owl. And that's the owl that does the classic whoo, 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 whoo. A little bit deeper perhaps than that. Again, this owl, because it is bigger, will eat larger prey. It can actually take rabbits. It will eat hares in the snowshoe hares back east. I've seen it take down a great blue heron. They're also quite territorial, at least compared to the barn owl. So they, and also being the larger owl is certainly the more dominant owl on the landscape within a territory. So moving on now to our smaller owls, forested owls. I'm going to talk a little bit about the saw-whet owl, which you'll see there in the top left, and the owlets of the saw-whet owl are on the bottom left, and then we also have the pygmy owl. Now, the saw-whet owl is really interesting. So I mentioned how the long-eared and the short-eared typically overwinter. It's the opposite for the saw-whets. They come here to breed. The same thing with the pygmy owl. They're a little bit more elusive than the saw-whets, and they're typically found at higher elevations. Again, too, they can also even overwinter, and then also breed here. Again, they at least the saw-whet owl, it migrates quite a bit, and it's found here, but it will migrate elsewhere, both in BC and also in the States. And it's quite amazing, actually. They seem to sort of all migrate at once, taking advantage of favorable weather conditions. Again, it's fairly common, but also elusive. It's quite small and hard to detect, and again, highly migratory. What is neat about the saw-whets, though, is that sometimes I should mention, we have a box program for screech owls, which I'll talk about in a little bit. But once in a while, we do get the saw-whet owls nesting in the boxes. And I just wanted to show you this from 2019 rather, sorry. Camera checking one of these boxes for screech owls, and we had a pleasant little surprise. I think we counted seven. I think we counted 7 owlets, little saw-whet owls in the Screech-owl box there, and they primarily actually eat deer mice. So, every year we do get saw-whets nesting in our Screech-owl boxes, which is always a very nice surprise. I just quickly wanted to mention too, the more, again, I guess all the owls are elusive, but the owls that we typically don't see every year in our region, and they tend to come when there's little or lack of food further north. The snowy owls being ones that come down. It's been quite a while since we've had a snowy owl year here on the coast, but they typically come en masse. When they do, there'll be several of them coming down, and it's quite a treat to be able to see them. The hawk owl, again, probably one of our most elusive owls, which we know very little about. It's a higher elevation owl. It also will come down here to overwinter, but definitely not en masse. You'll see an individual here and there. And it's a similar situation for the great gray owl too. This is an owl that is closely tied to boreal forests, but will come down here on the coast once in a while to overwinter. And we typically you'll see one individual owl for a certain amount of time. So the last owl I was going to talk a little bit about is the screech-owl. Again, a year-round resident owl that's associated with forested habitat. And the reason I wanted to spend a little bit of time on the screech-owl is because it's, again, one of the owls that the Fraser Valley Conservancy is working actively on. We have a box program, and we're also very interested in sightings of this owl, especially because it's an owl that has experienced a dramatic population decline over the last 2 decades. It has essentially declined by 90%, and there's very few detections left of it in the valley. And we're still trying to understand the reasons for why it's declining, and I'll get back to that in a second. I just thought I'd quickly play, hopefully this will come through, but this is how one of the typical sounds of a male screech owl. Some people refer to it as a bit of a bouncy ball call. Like you can kind of hear how it sort of bounces, sort of gets lower and lower at the end. So again, that's the call of the screech-owl. It's very subtle. It's certainly not loud compared to the barred owl. And as you can see too, not only doesn't have a sort of very high vocalization, but it's also an owl that's very good at camouflaging, as you can see here. It's got these great brown colorations overall its body, and these very bright yellow eyes, similar to the great horned owl. And it does have little ear tufts, as you can see here too, but they're smaller than the long-eared owl and the great horned owl. So the screech-owl prefers low-lying forested habitat, often closely associated with water bodies such as rivers, wetlands, marshlands. We call that habitat riparian habitat. It's extremely important for a lot of species that has unfortunately declined dramatically in our region. Anything that's low-lying and flat tends to get developed first, so we don't have a lot of this habitat left. And that's certainly been one of the main reasons for this owl's dramatic decline. It also likes areas where you have a lot of big black cottonwood trees and big leaf maples, again, near water, and these trees provide excellent nesting habitat for the screech-owl. And I should point out, none of the owls, make their own nests. They totally depend on there being natural cavities, either due to the fact that a branch has broken off a tree, or the top of a tree has broken, or it will take over a nest from a woodpecker. So owls are what we call secondary cavity nesters, and they certainly depend on the larger woodpeckers to make these nests. So there's a strong association there between our forest owls and woodpeckers, and they depend on the larger woodpeckers such as the pileated and the northern flicker for these nest sites. Again, as I mentioned, displacement due to habitat loss is one of the biggest threats that the screech-owl is facing, not only due to urbanization, but also being a forest owl. Logging and harvesting is a challenge for the species too. It tends to like mature forests, so 60 to 80 years plus. And this is also when forests typically get logged. And if you've been following the news lately in regards to Fairy Creek, screech-owls were certainly one of the species that the protesters and people that were against the logging were concerned about, because there has been several detections in that old growth forest, and there's certainly a very strong association between screech-owls and more mature forest. So the Fraser Valley Conservancy in an attempt to try and better understand what's happening with the species, initiated a nest box program in 2016 in collaboration with the province, Forest, Lands and Natural Resources. And we have to date installed 220 boxes on the coast, and we monitor these boxes annually. And these boxes were first installed in natural areas, in protected areas such as parks, provincial, regional, municipal, but we've also now been installing them more on private land in areas that are suitable for screech owls. And the hope is to have them nesting in these boxes to help them have places to nest, but also to further help understand the challenges the owls are facing. Another thing that I haven't mentioned is the potential for an interaction between the barred owls and the screech owls, as they're both forested owls, and the barred owls have become quite abundant on the coast, and they weren't 50 or so years ago. So there's also potential there for the predation of the screech owl by larger owls, and that's something that needs to be investigated further. Here, as an example, actually, just want to show this photo is taken from a woodshed in Abbotsford. This screech owl pair nested here 2 years in row and had a successful clutch each time. So they were last seen, I think, in 2014. And as you can see here, they're certainly not a shy, elusive owl. This is from a nest box, photos from the island, Vancouver Island, from a nest box program they initiated there. You can see the female there with a clutch of young. These are the same owlets, a little bit older. And again, here too, this is a short video from actually a natural cavity, a female with some youngsters. So she's doing a behavior there. She's puffing herself up a bit. It's a typical defensive behavior of an owl, is to kind of sway back and forth, make it look as big as possible, similar to what I guess a cat would do too, like they puff themselves up and they kind of, they're back up, essentially. So I wanted to wrap up a bit about what you can do to help owls. And I guess, Aleesha, you had a poll question. Yeah, there you go. She's always one step ahead of me. So we just wanted to know a little bit about if you've had any challenges with rodents, and if you've ever had to control for rodents and which methods you've used. We're just curious to know a little bit about your experience with those critters. Great. It looks like most people have answered, and that's actually really good answers. I mean, there's no, I want to say there's no right or wrong in this way. I guess what I'm trying to do here is just have some increased awareness of the risks of certain methods for controlling rodents. But I'm very happy to see that on my screen here that most of you have started with the removal of food sources and harborage, where places for rodents to hide. So there we go. So what I wanted to do here is sort of a segue into this final component on this talk, was to talk a little bit about owl-friendly rodent control. The options for installing nest boxes if you have a suitable habitat for an owl, creating old field habitat, and also finally how to respect owls and the habitat they depend on for their survival. So I really, first of all, wanted to go over one of the, I guess, issues or challenges that I've been working actively on now for the last 10 years, and that's the issue of secondary rat poisoning of our raptors. What's become apparent is that the rat poisons that we use, and there are many different kinds, and this is a whole separate talk, so I'm going to try and keep it short for the interest of time. But the rat poisons we use, they don't only target the rats and the house mice, but the newer rat poisons, we call them the second generation rat poisons or rodenticides. They are more toxic and persistent. And what can happen is that when a rat or a mouse eats these poisons, is that they might get predated on by an owl. And the reason for this is because the rat poisons are designed to be what we call slow reacting compounds, which means that the rat will not have any symptoms from eating the poison until 3 to 7 days after it's consumed it. And this lag time is actually part of how it's designed, so that the rat does not associate eating the poison, getting sick and dying, and also for its friends, so that because rats are what we call, they're neophobic. They're very scared of new food sources. They're very careful. There's a reason they've been able to spread around the world, following us humans where we go. And the reasons for their success is the fact that they are extremely careful in what they eat. So anyways, during this lag time is when the rodent, rat, mouse can get eaten by a predator. And what's also become more apparent over the last 2 decades is that these bait boxes that we put out, they don't discriminate between rats and, say, other mammals and birds. And what we've been seeing is that not only are the target rodents going in, but we get voles, sparrows will happily jump in and peck on the bait, invertebrates, slugs, beetles. Farmers will often report that slugs tend to like the bait, or they'll congregate around the bait block, and invertebrates don't. They have a different physiology than we do, and they actually don't get any sort of side effects from eating it. But you can see when you look at this diagram, it doesn't take a lot of imagination to see how pervasive these contaminants can become in the food chain. And it's real, and it's certainly an issue here on the coast. This is just a snapshot of some of the unfortunate cases that have happened over the last couple of years. Some of them, the bottom left is actually less than 2 weeks ago. And we currently actually do have a ban on the second generation compounds. There are some exemptions, but there is a current ban that was implemented by the province, and I will applaud the province for doing that, going ahead and just putting a break on the usage of these second generation compounds that are more toxic and persistent until there's been a thorough review of the effects that these rodenticides have on our local raptors and how we can better use them as a last resort only. Sometimes if you are dealing with a rat infestation, sometimes rat poisons might just be the only solution to get control of the situation. But permanent usage of rodenticides and also using rodenticides as a first resort is not a sustainable long-term solution, and it's affecting our local owls. So please, I'll show you some resources at the end, but when controlling for rodents, be it yourself, or if you're using a professional pest control operator, make sure that poisons are only used as a last resort. Another action you can do to help owls, if you have suitable habitat, is to install an owl box. These can be installed on buildings, such as you see here. It's on an outside of a barn. It can also be put on the inside of a barn, sorry. If there is no barns, we can also put them on poles. This is part of a project where we're actually putting barn owl boxes. Sorry, these are for barn owls, I should stress that. These are barn owl boxes, and they're put on poles around farm fields to control field voles. Field voles, as you remember, is one of the main prey for the barn owl. And the field voles can cause damage to plants, bushes, blueberry bushes in particular, but also vegetable farmers. So encouraging owls to these fields to hunt the voles is sort of a win-win situation for the farmer, getting free pest control and also providing the owl with a place to live. So we've been putting out these pull boxes across the valley to help in partnership with farmers to provide habitat or nest boxes for barn owls, but also encourage farmers to use natural rodent control, if you will, on their farms. And this is from one of the pull boxes, actually from Abbotsford, from Baines Farm. That's an organic blueberry farm. And the owls took to this box straight away. And as you can see here, there's 4 barn owlets in the box, and they nest at this farm every year now. Another box program that the Conservancy is responsible for is the Western Screech-owl box program, which I mentioned earlier. We used to, again, primarily put these in parks, but we have expanded and we are now putting them also on private properties in areas where there is suitable habitat for screech-owls. So if you have extensive forest habitat, more mature forest, certainly get in touch with us about the potential for putting up screech-owl boxes. And as I mentioned too, you can also create old field habitat. This can be done on a really large scale, but it also can be done just in your backyard. It can be a little area which you don't mow. You can, or if you want it to look a little nicer, you can put wildflowers in. We've done this ourselves on our front lawn. We essentially don't have anything to mow. Although mixed reactions from our neighbors perhaps on that, but it has certainly, we've noticed a huge difference in the number of birds that we see, and also insects, our native pollinators. And again, too, it does create habitat for voles, because voles depend on that longer grass, so it can kind of fold over itself and create that tussocky kind of base, as you can see here on the top right. And we certainly have resources available for you to help create it. It can be, again, small strips, patches, and anything will help. And then finally, I actually put this in a little bit as an afterthought, but I thought it would be important to point out, who doesn't, I love owls. They're just such a fascinating animal. And of course, it's a treat to be able to see them up close and enjoy them. But I also wanted to stress, and I don't have a problem with people taking photos of owls, such as in the top left corner, but I would very much like to stress that do not encroach on their habitat. Please don't chase them, and be respectful of the trails, and keep their distance. As I hope I've shown you tonight, these owls are already facing multiple challenges and threats trying to survive in our region. They've all lost their habitat. Some of them are not listed per se, but their numbers are still gone down. So I just very much would like to sort of point out, please enjoy the owls, but also respect their habitat, because that's what you see is pretty much what they have left to hunt in and survive over the winter. This is for their survival. So please respect their habitat. So I just wanted to wrap up pointing out some of the resources we have at the Fraser Valley Conservancy. They will be up on our new website soon. I'm happy to forward these documents to you if they're of interest. We have a shorter document that goes over how you can create old field habitat. Again, it doesn't have to be a large scale field. It can be strips, patches in your backyard. We also have best management practices on how to control rats. A lot of it's intuitive, but it doesn't hurt to get a reminder. We also have best management practices for how to control field voles, and also pocket gophers for the interior, just in case. We also have this great ID sheet to help you ID the owls that we have here on the coast. And for people that are into them, that are berry growers or no berry growers, we also have a vole control series looking at how you control voles, minimizing the usage of rodenticides. And I should also stress there is a mini series too, a video series, a short 3 video series on how to control rats on farms too, available for you to watch. I just wanted to quickly sum up with a big thank you to the Cascade Box Group. They've been the ones that have been building those lovely boxes that you've seen throughout this presentation. They're sort of I guess a sort of subgroup of the Delta Nats and the Vancouver Nats naturalist groups. And without their help and effort building these boxes, a lot of the work that I've been doing would not have been possible. So I just want to thank them. And I also wanted to thank Sean McCann. He's the one that has been taking a lot of the photos that you've seen in this presentation. And he's a very ethical, careful photographer. And I thank him for letting me use his photos in this presentation. And thank you so much for listening.
Fantastic. Thanks, Sophie. We have time for some Q&A. So if you have questions, everybody, don't forget to pop them in the chat. But I'll start with the question that we received right off the top. We were talking about barn owls and them being vole specialists. Do we have vole species at risk or species of concern here as well as the barn owls?
Yeah, it's a really good question. We don't actually. There's one. The Oregon vole is very rare, but none of the vole species are listed, to my knowledge.
All right, our next question is, if people have backyards or properties that they want to offer up for nest boxes, what should they do?
I think get in touch with me. My email's on the last slide, or contact we have a general email intake too, don't we, Aleesha?
Yeah, you could use info@fraservalleyconservancy.ca, but certainly if you have owl related questions, I'd say emailing Sophie directly, sophie@fraservalleyconservancy.ca is a good way to go.
Yeah, and just share where you're living, and then I can look it up. It's easy just to sort of have a quick look online and just see where you are, and then I can kind of we can make a decision based on that. So yeah.
All right, so we have Andrea and Paul who say that you helped install a barn owl box in a barn in Pitt Meadows a few years ago, but there doesn't seem to be any owl activity. Is there anything that you can do to make these areas more attractive?
Yeah, I think I remember that installation. That was quite the undertaking. And I've been meaning to get in touch. I'm glad you're joining us tonight. There's certainly something we can do. I wonder if it's just not obvious enough. I am actually going out to Pitt Meadows on Friday. I don't know if you're around then, but if you want to just get in touch with me, please do, because I feel like there is barn owls around where you live, and I wonder if we should move the box to the outside. There's options, but yeah, I'm really glad you're on the call, because I've been wondering about that box.
Sophie remembers all of her boxes that she's installed fondly, I'm sure.
That one was challenging.
Yeah. We have a question about Vancouver Island, and if you know of any organizations that are doing nest box programs or other owl related programs there that you might plug for people to look into.
Yeah, for sure. I know that the Habitat Acquisition Trust, have done some, they've both done a bit of barn owl work and screech-owl work, but I would if you Google HAT Vancouver Island, again, the Habitat Acquisition Trust, they would probably be the best organization to contact in regard to that.
Great. We have a note here about rodenticide free BC as a resource. And another question about blueberry fields and a lot of box traps around blueberry fields. Has there been work with the agricultural community by the FEC at all?
Yes, one of the projects I've been working on, and as I mentioned, is putting up the owl boxes around blueberry farms or in the fields, and also conducting outreach to the BC Blueberry Council and the Cranberry Marketing Association, and also other ag organizations when they have their AGMs or fall meetings. I've been working very closely with them to provide information about the usage of rodenticides, how to use them only as a last resort, and also working with alternatives. I'm actually very fortunate to be looking into whether we can use other types of traps to control voles in berry fields, and also seeing if we can make snap traps actually more effective in fields. You obviously have to cover them in fields because you don't want songbirds to get into the snap traps, but I've been very lucky to work with a local farmer, some local farmers here, Marcel and Nadia. They have the farm A Pinch of Soil, and we've been testing whether we can attract voles using the pheromones, the sex pheromones, to attract them to traps. So definitely trying to come up with alternatives, provide outreach, and so to ensure that farmers are aware of the risks of rodenticides, and that trying to find alternatives for them.
Great. We have a question here about knowledge about constructing these boxes for owls. Is there anywhere that you can find information about how to make these boxes?
Yes, and I'm glad you mentioned that, because I actually was one of the things I thought I should to mention is that you know, you can either buy them at the Cascade Box Groups builds them at cost, but if you want to build them yourself, you're certainly welcome to do that. Just fire me off an email and I'll send you the various designs. We have indoor boxes, outdoor boxes, and we've kind of modified them so that they work on the BC coast. The entrance holes are really small for the barn owls. We don't want the great horn owls to get into the boxes. We found if we make the entrance holes small, we also have a predator guard on them, ventilation holes. So yeah, just contact me and I'm happy to share the designs.
Hello.
Is this the one with the hand up? The iPad question? Oh, it's disappeared. All right. Go ahead. Yep. Go ahead and ask your question.
I forgot my question.
No problem.
That's so good.
Thanks. Okay. We have time for just one or two more, it seems. Do barn owls hang out around their nests year round outside of the breeding season? Where do they roost during the winter?
So barn owls, they tend to stay in the vicinity. So I'd say within 500 meters or so. They don't necessarily hang out in the box year round because can be buildup of parasites. So they tend to nest in the box, but then they typically roost elsewhere. So it'd be in a tree, in some other structure, a shed. They're pretty good at finding places to roost, and they certainly still stay within the 500-meter radius roughly overwintering. They don't go anywhere.
To feel like boys with two humming out.
All right, our last question is, sorry, hold on. Our last question is, if a barn owl is hunting and nesting nearby, is there any point of putting up a barn owl box on the same property?
Barn owls can, the reason, sorry, I should take one step back. The reason I encourage farmers to put up owl boxes in their fields is barn owls, unlike the great horned owl, they're not territorial. So what decides the density, determines the density of barn owls is food abundance. So you can have barn owls nesting really close by. Obviously, there's no guarantee, but I've had sometimes barn owls, if it's a really big barn, you can have 2 pairs in one building, for example. So it doesn't hurt to, if you are in an area where you think there's good habitat or you're experiencing some rodent issues on your place, then they can nest in pretty close proximity, and that's what we're trying to take advantage of when we're encouraging them to farm fields. So it looks like someone's raised their hand again, Aleesha. I don't know if you want to.
All right, the iPad. Do you have your question? We have just a couple seconds left here.
It's not a question, it's a comment. Once I did owl clipping with Sofi.
Oh, you came owl banding.
Yeah, owl banding.
Yeah, what's your name?
Marcello?
Hello. Where did you come out?
I forgot.
That's okay. No, I didn't have any pictures of that in my presentation, but when I monitor the barn owls every year, people can come out and help me band the owls. And I'm sure, did you get to hold the barn owl too while I banded it?
Yeah.
Great.
That's actually a great segue into us ending this presentation on our last slide, and that I will bring up right now. Oh, no, that's not it. That's my puzzle. All right, here we go. So thank you, everybody, for joining us. It's been absolutely fantastic having you here. If we didn't get to your questions, don't worry. You can always send us a message, and we'd be happy to share all of this information with you. Give a hoot. Please fill out the survey that we're going to be sending you. It helps us to plan new Nature Stewardship School workshops and to know what it is you enjoyed about this. The survey will be coming out in a couple of days, so please keep your eyes peeled for that. And as you heard from our young attendee, you can get involved with the Fraser Valley Conservancy. Sign up to be a volunteer, be a member, get our newsletter. There are lots of ways that you can get involved with the great work that we're doing here at the FVC. And of course, as always, check out our website for information and resources. We hope you've enjoyed your time with us. Have an excellent night. Happy holidays. We'll see you soon. Bye-bye.